The commander of Panzer 231 saw the muzzle flash first. It came from a tree line approximately 800 meters to the northeast. A brief orange bloom against the gray December sky, sharp and sudden in the frozen Belgian morning. Then came the sound. Not the sharp crack of the British 17-pounder that Oberfeldwebel Franz Weber had learned to recognize over 3 years of combat. Something deeper. A bass note that seemed to compress the air itself, that rolled across the frozen fields like distant thunder that settled into Weber's chest and stayed there. The round struck the Panther's glacis plate at an angle that should have deflected it. 80 millimeters of face-hardened steel, sloped at 55 degrees, mathematics and metallurgy working together to create protection equivalent to 140 millimeters of vertical armor. Every German tank crew knew these numbers, had been taught them in training, had seen them confirmed in combat, had trusted their lives to them for months or years. The American 90 millimeter round didn't care about the mathematics. It went through. The penetration was clean, almost surgical. The hardened steel penetrator, traveling at 2,800 feet per second, punched through the glacis plate like it was ordinary steel instead of face-hardened armor. The round continued through the radio operator's position, struck the ammunition storage rack mounted along the hull side, and detonated 3 rounds of 75 millimeter ammunition in their storage bins. The internal explosion was catastrophic. The turret of Panzer 231 lifted off the hull, 30 tons of steel and men rising 12 feet into the air, rotating slowly in the freezing December light before crashing upside down into the Belgian mud 20 meters from the burning hull. The sound of impact carried across the battlefield metal, striking frozen earth, final and absolute. 5 men had occupied that tank 30 seconds earlier. Unteroffizier Ernst Hoffmann, 26 years old, from Brandenburg. His wife Margrethe was 8 months pregnant. Ernst carried her photograph in his breast pocket, showed it to anyone who would look. A pretty blonde woman standing in front of their small house, one hand resting on her swollen belly, smiling at the camera with hope in her eyes. Friedrich Kessler, the gunner, 24 years old, had worked in his father's printing shop before the war. Steady hands, excellent eye for range estimation, never missed morning prayers. Martin Vogel, the loader, 22. Farm boy from Saxony, could lift the 17-pound armor-piercing rounds like they weighed nothing, talked constantly about the dairy herd he would raise after the war ended. The driver and radio operator Weber never learned their names. They were replacements assigned to Ernst's crew only 3 days earlier, when the original men were wounded during the advance into Belgium. All 5 gone, not wounded, not captured, simply erased from existence in the span of 2 seconds. Transformed from living men with hopes and families and futures into component parts of a funeral pyre that would burn for the next 4 hours, sending black smoke into the December sky as a marker of American firepower and German mortality. Franz Weber watched this happen from 200 meters away. He was looking through his cupola optics when Ernst's tank died, the magnified image making the destruction intimate and inescapable. He saw the turret lift, saw it rotate, saw it fall. The optical lenses were good. German glass Zeiss precision manufacturing, clear enough that Weber could see Ernst's command cupola on the overturned turret. The hatch still closed, Ernst still inside when the ammunition cooked off and the fire consumed everything. Weber's voice when it came was steady and professional, the voice of a man who had survived 3 years of combat through discipline and quick decisions, the voice of a man who understood that emotion was a luxury soldiers could not afford in the moment of crisis. "Back up," he told his driver, "to reverse into the depression behind us, now." Hans Keller responded immediately. 22 years old farm boy from Bavaria, married 3 months before deployment to a girl named Anna, who waited in a farmhouse outside Munich with their infant daughter. Hans was a good driver, smooth on the controls, could coax extra kilometers from a worn transmission through gentle handling and mechanical sympathy. But his voice cracked when he spoke. "Herr Oberfeldwebel, that was Ernst's tank. That was... I know who it was. Reverse, now." The Panther lurched backward. 50 tons of steel and armor plate moving in reverse transmission, grinding slightly, the damaged final drive unit protesting the strain. The tank settled into the shallow depression behind their previous position, hull down, only the turret exposed above the terrain. Hans spoke again, quieter this time. Should we try to reach them in case someone... No one survived that, Hans." Silence on the intercom. The sound of the engine idling, the distant crack of small arms fire from the American infantry positions ahead, and underneath it all, the deep boom of the 90 millimeter gun firing again from somewhere in the tree line to the northeast. Weber tried to process what he had just witnessed. The gun that killed Ernst was not supposed to be here. Intelligence had placed American 90 millimeter tank destroyers 50 kilometers to the south, supporting General Patton's Third Army in their drive toward the Saar River. The units facing Weber's battalion were supposed to be equipped with 75 millimeter Shermans and perhaps a few British Fireflies mounting the 17-pounder. This was something else entirely. The penetration was not possible with a 75 millimeter gun. Not at that range, not at that angle. Weber had seen American Sherman rounds bounce off Panther Glacis plates during the Normandy fighting, had watched the shells ricochet skyward. Trailing sparks had felt the impact through his tank's hull without concern because the mathematics of sloped armor were reliable and proven. Even the British 17-pounder, which German intelligence considered the most potent Allied anti-tank weapon in Western Europe, would have struggled with that shot. The 17-pounder could penetrate Panther frontal armor under ideal conditions at ranges of 5 to 600 meters, but ideal conditions meant perfect angle of impact, specialized armor piercing, discarding sabot ammunition, and a stationary target. This American gun had punched through at 800 meters with what appeared to be standard ammunition against a moving target, which meant everything Weber had been taught about armor protection was suddenly in question. Franz Weber had been fighting in tanks since June 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. He was 23 years old when his Panzer III crossed into Soviet territory, part of the Great Crusade that was supposed to destroy Bolshevism in 6 weeks and secure living space for the German people. The optimism lasted approximately 3 weeks. That was when Weber's Panzer III first encountered a Soviet T-34 tank. The T-34's sloped armor deflected 3 German rounds before the Soviet tank's 76mm gun punched through the Panzer III's frontal plate and killed the radio operator in a spray of metal fragments and hydraulic fluid. Weber survived that encounter because his tank was reversing when the round hit. The oblique angle and rearward movement meant the penetrator struck with reduced energy enough to breach the armor, but not enough to continue through the entire crew compartment. He learned an important lesson that day. Technology was not static. The enemy could innovate. Armor superiority was temporary and could be lost in an instant of violent physics. Near Smolensk in August 1941, Ernst Hoffmann saved Weber's life. Weber's Panzer III had taken a hit from a Soviet anti-tank rifle. The 14.5mm round penetrated the engine compartment and the tank caught fire. Weber was trying to escape through the commander's hatch when ammunition began cooking off in the turret below him. Ernst Hoffmann, commanding another Panzer III in the platoon, stopped his own tank under fire, dismounted, and dragged Weber clear approximately 15 seconds before the fuel tank exploded. That was how their friendship began, a debt of life that Weber could never fully repay, a bond forged in fire and survival that made them closer than brothers. And now Ernst was dead, killed by a gun that wasn't supposed to exist in this sector, his body burning inside an overturned turret while his pregnant wife waited in Brandenburg for letters that would never come. The date was December 17th, 1944. The location was eastern Belgium, 6 kilometers southwest of the town of Sankt Vith. The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West, had begun 36 hours earlier with a surprise attack along a thinly held section of the American front. Weber's unit Kampfgruppe Hansen was part of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, approximately 30 Panthers and 20 Panzer IVs, supported by mechanized infantry and self-propelled artillery. Their objective was to bypass American strongpoints, reach the Meuse River crossings, and open routes for follow-on forces that would drive to the port of Antwerp and split the British and American armies. The plan was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious, but German tank crews went into the offensive with confidence based on their equipment's proven technical superiority. The Panther tank represented the apex of German armored design, introduced in 1943 following the shock of encountering masses of Soviet T-34s at Kursk. The Panther combined heavy sloped armor with a powerful 75mm gun that could penetrate virtually any Allied tank at combat ranges. More importantly, the Panther's frontal armor had proven essentially invulnerable to American and British weapons throughout the Normandy campaign. Engagements followed a predictable pattern. American Shermans would fire at medium range. Their 75mm rounds would bounce off the Panther's glacis plate, and the Panther would destroy the Shermans methodically with its superior gun and optics. This created a psychological advantage that was perhaps more valuable than the technical one. German crews knew they could survive hits, could trade shots with multiple enemy tanks, and prevail through superior protection and firepower. This confidence sustained morale even as Germany's strategic position deteriorated through the summer and fall of 1944. Weber had received his Panther in August 1944, shortly after the Normandy breakout, tactical number 234. He commanded it for exactly 4 months and 6 days before an American 90mm round destroyed it and nearly killed him. But on the morning of December 17th, as his Panther idled in the shallow depression while Ernst Hoffmann's tank burned 200 meters away, Weber did not know any of this yet. He knew only that something fundamental had changed, that the weapon which had killed his best friend represented a threat his training had not prepared him for, that the mathematics of armor and penetration that he had relied upon were no longer reliable. Otto Fischer, the gunner, spoke through the intercom, 25 years old from Saxony, a jeweler's apprentice before the war, precise and methodical, excellent at range estimation, never panicked under fire. Herr Oberfeldwebel, I observed two muzzle flashes from different positions. The Americans have multiple guns in that tree line. How many? At least two, possibly more. Difficult to determine with the vegetation and poor visibility. The weather was working in Germany's favor strategically. Low clouds and freezing rain grounded Allied aircraft and negated American air superiority. But tactically, the poor visibility complicated tank combat by restricting observation and making target identification difficult. Heinrich Müller, the loader, was 19 years old, from Stuttgart. In combat for exactly 3 days, assigned as a replacement when the original loader was wounded during the advance into Belgium. Young, nervous, but physically strong and willing to learn. His voice came through the intercom high and tight with fear barely controlled. Herr Oberfeldwebel, can that gun really penetrate our glacis armor? I thought we were protected against American weapons. It was a reasonable question. The answer was no longer clear. The gun can penetrate us, Weber said. Honesty seemed more useful than false reassurance. We must fight smarter. Use terrain, identify targets before exposing ourselves. The radio crackled, battalion frequency, multiple voices overlapping in near panic. Panzer 212 has hit turret penetration. We're bailing out. I can't see them. Where are they shooting from? Request artillery support, immediate grid reference. This is 218. We're reversing to cover, taking fire. Then Lieutenant Werner Brandt's voice cut through the chaos. Calm professional, the voice of a trained officer maintaining discipline under fire. All units, this is 212. Maintain radio discipline, disperse and seek cover. Do not cluster. Identify targets before engaging. I say again, identify before engaging. Brandt commanded Panzer 212, 28 years old professional officer trained at the Panzer School before the war. Married to a woman named Helga who taught school in a small town near Hamburg. Brandt was competent and reliable. The kind of officer who kept his men alive through tactical skill rather than reckless aggression. Weber heard the deep boom of the 90mm gun again, then Brandt's voice still controlled but with an edge of pain underneath. This is 212. We are hit turret side penetration, internal fire, bailing out now. The sound that came next would stay with Weber for the rest of his life. Screaming, high-pitched, desperate, the sound of a 19-year-old boy burning alive inside a steel box. The loader trapped in the turret as flames from the ruptured propellant charges filled the fighting compartment. The screams came through the radio because the boy's intercom was still connected, broadcasting his death to every tank in the battalion. 40 seconds, that's how long it lasted. 40 seconds of screaming that gradually weakened and then stopped, replaced by the crackle of flames and the sound of ammunition cooking off in irregular pops and bangs. Hans Keller was crying. Weber could hear it over the intercom. Quiet sobs the young driver was trying to suppress. Hans... The crying stopped. Ja, Herr Oberfeldwebel, I need you focused. Can you do that? A pause, a shaky breath. Ja, Herr Oberfeldwebel. Good. Stay ready to move on my command. Weber assessed the tactical situation. 2 Panthers destroyed in the first 3 minutes of contact. Perhaps 15 or 20 crew members killed or wounded out of the 10 men who had crewed those tanks. The survivors were scattered, seeking cover, unable to effectively return fire because they could not identify the American positions. 0 American losses confirmed. The kill ratio was completely one-sided. This was not how engagements with American armor were supposed to proceed. Weber made a decision. Otto, do you still have eyes on that tree line? Ja, Herr Oberfeldwebel, watching for muzzle flashes. When you see the next flash, acquire the target immediately and prepare to fire. Hans, be ready to reverse as soon as Otto fires. We will not stay exposed. Understood, Herr Oberfeldwebel. They waited, engine idling, optics scanning, the sound of burning tanks and distant small arms fire, the smell of smoke and diesel, and the metallic scent of fear that Weber had learned to recognize in enclosed spaces where men faced death. The muzzle flash came from a slightly different position than before. The Americans were displacing between shots using multiple prepared firing positions to avoid counter-battery fire. Target acquired, Otto said. Range 760 meters. Fire! The Panther's 75mm gun fired with a sharp crack and a burst of propellant smoke. The recoil rocked the tank slightly. Otto had aimed well. The armor-piercing round struck the American tank destroyer exactly where he had targeted it, center mass of the turret. The M36 exploded, not a small fire, but a massive secondary detonation as stored ammunition ignited. Flames and smoke boiled upward, and even at 700 meters, Weber could feel the concussion through his tank's hull. 1 American tank destroyer destroyed. It was the first successful German kill of the engagement. For a brief moment, Weber felt satisfaction. His crew had performed well under pressure. They had identified a target and eliminated it efficiently. The satisfaction lasted approximately 5 seconds. That was when 2 more M36 tank destroyers opened fire from positions Weber had not identified, separate locations 300 meters apart, both with clear fields of fire to his position. The first round passed 2 meters over Weber's turret, so close he heard the supersonic crack as it went by. The second round hit, not his tank, Panzer 223, commanded by a young Feldwebel named Klaus Richter, attempting to maneuver to a better position 400 meters from Weber's location. The American round struck the Panther's glasses plate at approximately 70 degrees to the surface, normal the optimal angle for the sloped armor to provide maximum protection. The round penetrated anyway. Weber watched through his optics as the penetrator punched through 80 millimeters of face-hardened steel and continued into the crew compartment. The tank stopped moving immediately. Smoke began rising from the engine deck. Hatches popped open and crew members began bailing out, moving with the desperate speed of men who knew their tank was about to burn. Hans Keller's voice was barely a whisper. Herr Oberfeldwebel, they can penetrate our frontal armor, even at optimal angles. How is that possible? It was an excellent question. Weber did not have a good answer. The mathematics were clear. 80 millimeters of armor at 55 degrees of slope should provide protection equivalent to approximately 140 millimeters of vertical armor. The American 90 millimeter gun, according to German intelligence, had penetration capability comparable to the British 17-pounder. Good, but not good enough to reliably defeat Panther glacis at ranges beyond 600 meters, except the evidence in front of Weber's eyes contradicted the intelligence assessment. 3 Panthers penetrated frontally in less than 10 minutes, all at ranges between 700 and 800 meters, all at angles that should have provided maximum armor effectiveness, which meant German intelligence was wrong, or outdated, or the Americans had improved their ammunition, or some combination of all 3 factors. What mattered was the result. The Panther's frontal armor, the foundation of German tactical doctrine and crew confidence, was no longer reliably protective against American weapons. Weber made another decision. All tanks, this is 234, fall back to rally point Gustav, maintain dispersion, use terrain masking, do not engage unless you have clear shots from covered positions. He was ordering a retreat. Withdrawing in contact, one of the most dangerous maneuvers in armored warfare, but staying in position meant more Panthers destroyed by an enemy they could not effectively engage. Battalion frequency crackled, the major commanding their Kampfgruppe, his voice tight with controlled anger. 234, you are ordered to advance and suppress those tank destroyers. We need that road junction. Weber looked at the burning hulks of Panzer 231 and 212, looked at the crew members from 223 dragging their wounded driver away from their immobilized tank, looked at the tree line where American guns were positioned in prepared hides with overlapping fields of fire and pre-surveyed engagement ranges. He thought about Ernst Hoffmann's pregnant wife, about the 19-year-old loader who had screamed for 40 seconds while he burned, about Hans Keller's infant daughter who needed her father to come home. Negative, Herr Major. Advancing into that kill zone will result in total loss of the platoon with no corresponding enemy casualties. Request artillery fire mission on suspected American positions before we advance. Long silence on the radio. Then, understood 234, artillery support will be available in 15 minutes. Hold position and observe. Weber exhaled slowly. He had just contradicted a direct order from a superior officer. In the SS, that could result in immediate court-martial, possibly execution for cowardice in the face of the enemy, but Weber was still alive. His crew was still alive. And sometimes survival required making hard choices about which orders to follow and which to interpret creatively. The artillery arrived 12 minutes later, German 105mm guns firing from positions several kilometers to the rear. The shells impacted in and around the tree line where the American tank destroyers were positioned. Not precision fire, but enough to force the Americans to button up or displace. When the barrage lifted, Weber's platoon advanced carefully. They found 2 abandoned M36 tank destroyers damaged by artillery fragments. Crews evacuated. The rest of the American tank destroyer company had withdrawn in good order, following their doctrine of shoot, displace, and avoid decisive engagement. The road junction was secured. The tactical objective achieved. The cost was 3 Panthers destroyed, 11 men killed, 8 wounded. The date was December 17th, 1944. The time was approximately 9:30 hours. Franz Weber had been in combat for less than 2 hours. He would survive the Ardennes offensive, would be wounded on December 23rd when his Panther was destroyed by another 90mm round, would be evacuated to a training facility in Germany where he would teach replacement crews that everything the Wehrmacht told them about Panther invulnerability was a lie. But on this December morning, sitting in his idling Panther while Ernst Hoffmann's tank burned and smoke rose into the gray sky, Weber knew only one thing with absolute certainty. The war had changed. The Americans had brought a weapon that negated Germany's remaining technical advantage, and no amount of courage or skill or tactical brilliance could overcome the simple mathematics of industrial capacity married to adequate technology. The sound of the 90mm gun, that deep bass boom that compressed the air and settled into the chest, would haunt Weber for the rest of his life. 28 years later, dying in a Munich hospital bed, his last words would be about Panzer 231, about Ernst, about the moment everything changed. But that was still far in the future. For now, there was only the burning metal and the frozen mud and the terrible knowledge that everything he had believed about survival was wrong. The letter Franz Weber wrote to his son on the evening of December 18th would never be mailed. He sat in the commander's position of his Panther, parked in a muddy field 3 kilometers west of the morning's engagement, writing by the light of a shielded flashlight. The paper was damp from the freezing rain that had turned to sleet. His hands shook slightly, not from cold, but from exhaustion and the residual adrenaline that combat pumps into the blood and refuses to fully drain away. Outside, the sounds of a battalion regrouping, engines idling, men speaking in low voices. The clank of tools as crews performed hasty maintenance on vehicles that had been driven hard and fired harder, the smell of diesel and gun smoke and wet earth. Inside the turret, quiet. Otto Fischer was sleeping, curled in the gunner's position, his face slack with the absolute unconsciousness that follows extreme stress. Heinrich Müller sat on the turret floor, knees drawn up, staring at nothing. Hans Keller was outside checking the final drive unit that had been making concerning noises during the withdrawal. Weber wrote carefully, forming each letter with precision despite his shaking hands. My dear Karl, you are learning to be a tank commander. They will teach you that the Panther's armor protects you. They will show you calculations proving British and American guns cannot penetrate the glacis plate at combat ranges. They will fill your head with numbers and angles and mathematics of survival. I have seen those calculations proven wrong. Yesterday, I watched my best friend die when an American gun put a round through armor that was supposed to be invulnerable. The round did not ask permission from our engineers. It did not consult the mathematics. It simply went through. Weber paused, thought about what else to write, thought about Ernst Hoffmann's wife receiving a telegram, thought about Karl, 16 years old, training at a facility in Bavaria, probably learning the same lies Weber had been taught. If you receive orders to the front before this war ends, remember this. Courage cannot defeat physics. Your bravery will not stop a shell traveling 800 meters per second. Do not believe the instructors who tell you the Panther makes you invincible. It does not. He signed it, folded it, tucked it into his breast pocket next to the photograph of his late wife, killed in an Allied bombing raid on Munich in 1943. He never mailed the letter because 18 hours later he would be fighting for his life again, and in the chaos that followed, the letter would be forgotten until weeks later when he found it blood-stained and crumpled in his pocket after his own Panther was destroyed. But Karl would eventually read it, would find it among Weber's effects after his father's death in 1973, would understand finally what his father had tried to tell him about the difference between propaganda and truth. The battalion briefing took place at 2100 hours in a commandeered farmhouse that smelled of old hay and departed cattle. 23 tank commanders gathered in a room lit by kerosene lamps, their faces hollowed by shadow and fatigue. The major commanding their Kampfgruppe stood at a crude map table. He was 42 years old, a career officer, veteran of Poland and France and Russia. His name was Steiner, and he had the look of a man carrying weight that could not be set down. Gentlemen, he said without preamble, today we lost 7 Panthers, destroyed or immobilized beyond field repair. That represents nearly 1/4 of our starting strength. Casualties are 32 killed, 21 wounded. Most of those losses occurred in the first 2 hours of combat. He paused, let the numbers settle. The room was silent, except for the hiss of the lamps and the distant rumble of artillery. The Americans have deployed a weapon system we were not adequately prepared for, the 90mm gun mounted on the M36 tank destroyer. This weapon has penetration capability equivalent to our 88mm anti-tank gun. It can defeat Panther frontal armor at ranges up to 1,000 meters under most combat conditions. A young lieutenant, perhaps 24 years old, spoke up. But Herr Major, we were told the Panther's glacis armor was invulnerable to American weapons. How is this possible? Steiner's expression hardened. What we were told and what the Americans can do are apparently two different things. The intelligence assessments were based on the American 75mm gun and the British 17-pounder. The 90mm gun changes that calculation entirely. He gestured to a technical officer standing beside the map table. Hauptmann, from the Ordnance Corps, bespectacled and precise. The Hauptmann cleared his throat. The 90mm gun was originally developed as an anti-aircraft weapon. High muzzle velocity, flat trajectory designed to engage bombers at extreme altitude. When adapted for anti-tank use, these same characteristics make it extremely effective against armor. He produced a diagram showing penetration values at various ranges. The M82 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap, round which is the standard American anti-tank ammunition, can penetrate approximately 7 inches of vertical armor plate at 500 yards. Against our sloped glacis, accounting for the angle, it retains sufficient energy to penetrate at ranges up to 1,000 meters, the young lieutenant again. But surely the British 17-pounder is more dangerous. Intelligence briefings emphasize the Firefly as the primary threat. The Hauptmann shook his head. The 17-pounder is technically superior in some respects. Higher velocity, better penetration with specialized ammunition. But the British have chronic shortages of their armor-piercing, discarding sabot rounds. British tank commanders must ration their most effective ammunition. The Americans have no such constraint. He let that sink in. More critically, the British integrate Fireflies into standard tank troops. One Firefly per 4 tanks. When you encounter a British armored regiment, you face perhaps 12 Fireflies among 48 tanks. The rest are standard Shermans with 75mm guns that cannot harm your frontal armor. The Hauptmann's voice became quieter, more grave. The Americans organize differently. Tank destroyer battalions operate independently, 54 90mm guns per battalion. When you encounter an American tank destroyer battalion, you face 54 weapons that can all kill you frontally. All with unlimited ammunition, all crewed by men trained specifically in anti-tank ambush tactics. Silence in the room, men doing mathematics in their heads, calculating odds that came out badly no matter how the numbers were arranged. Weber spoke for the first time. How many M36 battalions are in this sector? The Hauptmann consulted notes. Intelligence estimates 3 to 5 battalions within the Ardennes region. That represents between 160 and 270 vehicles mounting 90mm guns. More silence, heavier now. Major Steiner took over again. Gentlemen, I will not lie to you. Our technical advantage has been significantly reduced. The Americans have closed the capability gap we relied upon, but this does not mean we cannot fight effectively. It means we must fight smarter. He outlined new tactical guidance: avoid predictable routes, use terrain aggressively, never advance without reconnaissance, engage from maximum range when possible, call for artillery support liberally, withdraw when facing overwhelming firepower rather than accepting casualties for minimal gain. All sensible advice, all essentially defensive in nature, all a significant departure from the aggressive offensive spirit that had carried German armored forces to victories earlier in the war. When the briefing ended, men filed out slowly, conversations in low voices, the clink of equipment, the scrape of boots on wooden floors. Werner Brandt caught Weber's arm as he was leaving. Brandt's face was bandaged burns covered with gauze, but he had refused evacuation. His voice was rough, damaged by smoke inhalation. Franz, a moment. They stepped outside into the freezing night, stars visible now, the clouds having lifted, the temperature dropping toward 0. I wrote a letter to Helga, Brandt said, to my wife. Would you mail it for me if something happens? Weber started to object, to offer reassurance. Brandt stopped him with a raised hand. No platitudes. I have done the mathematics. We are losing 8 tanks per day. The battalion started with 30 Panthers. We have 23 operational now. In 4 more days, we will have none. The odds of my survival are poor. He pulled an envelope from his jacket, handed it to Weber. If I die, make sure Helga receives this. Tell her I died well. Tell her I did my duty. Weber took the envelope, felt the weight of it, paper and ink, and a man's final words to the woman he loved. You will survive this, Werner. Brandt smiled slightly, the expression painful on his burned face. Perhaps, but insurance costs nothing. But 3 days later, Christmas Eve, Werner Brandt's Panther would take a 90mm round through the turret at a range of 900 meters near the town of Mannheim. The round would kill Brandt instantly, along with his gunner and loader. Weber would personally recover Brandt's body from the burning wreck, would find the wedding ring on his charred hand, would mail it to Helga along with the letter and a note explaining how her husband died, bravely leading his men. But on this December night, the 2 men simply stood in the freezing dark breath, steaming, listening to the distant rumble of artillery and the closer sounds of their battalion preparing for another day of combat. December 19th began before dawn with the rumble of engines and the clank of track links on frozen ground. Weber's platoon, reduced to 3 operational Panthers, was assigned to flank security for the battalion's advance toward Grandmesnil. The objective was a road junction that would open routes to the Meuse River crossings. Intelligence reported light American resistance, primarily infantry with standard anti-tank guns. Intelligence was wrong again. The engagement began at 0847 hours with such sudden violence that Weber had no time to process what was happening before men started dying. His platoon was moving in column along a farm road, 50-meter intervals between vehicles, when the lead Panther simply exploded. Not hit, not damaged. Exploded. The entire tank lifting off the ground in a ball of orange flame and black smoke turret, separating from hull debris raining down across a 100-meter radius. The second Panther, commanded by a young Feldwebel named Klaus Richter, attempted to reverse, got perhaps 20 meters before a 90mm round struck its glasses plate and penetrated. The tank stopped moving. Smoke poured from the engine deck. Crew began bailing out, 3 men escaping before ammunition cooked off and flames consumed the vehicle. 2 Panthers destroyed in less than 30 seconds. Weber's training and experience took over. Hard right behind that building now, Hans responded instantly. The Panther lurched off the road tracks, chewing frozen mud, and slewed behind the ruins of a stone barn that provided partial cover. Otto scanned for targets. Heinrich, stand ready. Hans, if we take a hit, you reverse immediately on my command. Understood. Affirmative responses from all three crew members. Voices tight but controlled. Fear managed through training and discipline. Otto's voice came through calm and professional. Herr Oberfeldwebel, I count at least 6 separate firing positions. This is not a hasty ambush. The Americans have been here for hours, maybe days. Prepared positions, pre-surveyed ranges, overlapping fields of fire. Weber raised his head above the cupola rim, using binoculars to scan the terrain ahead. The American positions were beautifully sighted. A low ridge line approximately 800 meters distant, scattered vegetation providing concealment, multiple hull-down positions that exposed only the turrets of the tank destroyers. Professional work. Not the hasty deployment of units rushed into position, but the deliberate preparation of anti-tank hunters who understood their business. The radio exploded with traffic, multiple units in contact, calls for artillery support, damage reports, one voice screaming that his driver was dead and he could not get the body out of the hatch because it was wedged by the impact. Major Steiner's voice cut through the chaos. All units suppressive fire on the ridgeline. Smoke if you have it. We need to cover the recovery of wounded. Weber's platoon was down to his single tank. The other two were burning. He had no smoke rounds remaining. His options were limited to bad and worse. Engage from his current position and likely be destroyed by concentrated return fire. Withdraw and abandon the wounded crew members from Richter's tank who were pinned down in the open. Or attempt some third option that did not immediately present itself. Hans Keller spoke quietly over the intercom. Herr Oberfeldwebel, I noticed something during the engagement near Sankt Vith. The Americans displace after firing. They do not stay in the same position. They shoot and move. Weber processed this. You are certain? Yeah, I watched the muzzle flashes, never twice from exactly the same spot. Otto added his observation. The positions are pre-surveyed. They know the ranges already. They can displace and return to firing positions quickly because they have rehearsed this. Weber thought about American tank destroyer doctrine, about units trained specifically for anti-tank ambush, about crews who practiced displacement drills until they could move between positions in less than a minute. An idea formed. Dangerous, but possible. Otto, I am going to expose our position deliberately. When they fire at us, you track the muzzle flashes, not to the firing position, but to the likely displacement route. The Americans will move after firing. That is when they are most vulnerable. Understood, Herr Oberfeldwebel. Hans, when I give the command, you will advance 40 meters and stop, then reverse immediately. We will be exposed for perhaps 10 seconds. Herr Oberfeldwebel, 10 seconds is enough time for them to put 3 rounds into us. Yes, which is why Otto must be very fast. Ready. The crew readied themselves. Heinrich loaded an armor-piercing round. Otto aligned his sight on the suspected American positions. Hans prepared to move. Execute! The Panther lurched forward, emerged from cover, presented its frontal armor to the American positions 800 meters away. Immediately, 2 M36 fired. The sound of the 90mm guns rolled across the frozen fields. Weber saw the muzzle flashes, saw the smoke, saw the rounds coming. The first round missed, passed overhead with a crack like thunder, close enough that Weber felt the pressure wave. The second round hit the glacis plate, struck at a slight angle, perhaps 80 degrees to the surface, normal. For a fraction of a second, Weber thought the armor would hold. It did not. The penetration was not as catastrophic as what he had witnessed with other tanks. The round punched through the glacis, struck the transmission assembly, and fragmented. But the energy was mostly absorbed by the transmission's mass. Fragments scattered through the driver's compartment but did not penetrate into the turret. Hans screamed, not in fear, in pain. Shrapnel had hit him multiple fragments in the left shoulder and face. But Hans was a Bavarian farm boy, strong and stubborn. Despite the wounds, despite the blood running down his face, he threw the Panther into reverse and backed them behind cover. Otto fired during the reversal, fired not at the positions where the Americans had shot from, but at a spot 300 meters to the left where he had calculated they would displace to. The 75mm armor piercing round caught an M36 in the side armor as it was moving between positions. The penetration was clean. The American tank destroyer exploded, ammunition detonating flames and smoke boiling upward. 1 kill confirmed, but the cost was high. Hans was badly wounded, bleeding heavily. The transmission was damaged, grinding and smoking. The Panther could still move, but its mobility was severely compromised. Weber made a decision. We withdraw. Hans, can you drive? Hans's voice was thick with pain and blood. Ja, Herr Oberfeldwebel, I can drive. Then get us out of here. Otto covering fire on my mark. Heinrich, prepare smoke grenades for manual deployment. They withdrew under fire, moving slowly due to the damaged transmission, taking 2 more hits, both glancing shots that failed to penetrate but left long scars across the turret face. Heinrich threw smoke grenades that created a concealing screen. American fire continued but became less accurate as visibility degraded. They reached the rally point 20 minutes later. Hans collapsed as soon as he opened his hatch, falling 3 meters to the ground. Medics rushed forward. Weber climbed down, helped them lift Hans onto a stretcher. Hans grabbed Weber's arm. His left eye was ruined, destroyed by a fragment. Blood covered half his face, but his right eye was clear and focused. Herr Oberfeldwebel, tell my wife, tell Anna, tell her I tried to come home. You will tell her yourself. You are going to survive this. Hans smiled slightly. No, but thank you for saying it. The medics carried him away. Weber would later learn that Hans Keller survived his wounds but lost the left eye and partial use of his left arm. He was medically discharged in January 1945, returned to his farm in Bavaria, lived until 1989, never spoke about the war except to say that his Oberfeldwebel had been a good commander who kept men alive when he could. Weber stood in the mud watching the ambulance drive away. Around him, the battalion was regrouping, counting losses, preparing for orders to advance again. The casualty reports came in through the afternoon. 8 Panthers destroyed or immobilized, 31 men killed, 24 wounded. The battalion that had started the offensive with 30 Panthers now had 15 operational. Major Steiner gathered the surviving commanders for another briefing. His face was gray with fatigue and stress. Gentlemen, I have new intelligence. The Americans have deployed another weapon, the M26 Pershing heavy tank. It mounts the same 90mm gun as the M36, but in a fully enclosed turret on a heavy chassis with armor comparable to our Panther. He showed them a photograph, grainy and indistinct, taken by reconnaissance. The Pershing looked similar to a Sherman, but heavier, more aggressive purpose, built for combat rather than adapted from existing designs. Initial reports indicate the Pershing's frontal armor can withstand our 75mm gun at combat ranges. Gentlemen, this means the Americans now have a tank that can fight ours on equal terms, gun for gun, armor for armor, with the advantage of numerical superiority. A lieutenant asked the question everyone was thinking. How many Pershings are in theater? Unknown. Intelligence estimates fewer than 50 currently in Europe, but production is ramping up. More arrive every week. Weber did the mathematics in his head. Fewer than 50 Pershings now. But American factories could produce thousands if they chose to allocate resources. German Panther production had peaked at 380 per month and was now declining due to Allied bombing and raw material shortages. The industrial equation was becoming impossible to ignore. Major Steiner continued, we have also received updated intelligence on American tank destroyer deployment. There are currently 7 M36 battalions in the Ardennes sector. That represents approximately 378 90mm guns. 378 guns, against perhaps 200 German Panthers and Tigers in the entire Ardennes offensive, and the German number was decreasing daily while American reinforcements continued arriving. Steiner's voice became quieter, more personal. Gentlemen, I will speak plainly. Our mission is becoming untenable. We are suffering unsustainable casualties against an enemy who can replace losses faster than we can inflict them. Higher command insists we continue the offensive. I am obligated to relay those orders, but I am also obligated to preserve your lives when possible. He looked at each commander in turn. Fight intelligently. Withdraw when overwhelmed. Survive when you can. Dead heroes serve Germany poorly. Living soldiers who fight tomorrow serve better. It was the closest a German officer could come to admitting defeat without facing court-martial. The briefing ended. Men filed out into the December darkness. Tomorrow they would attack again, would advance toward objectives that seemed increasingly meaningless, would face American 90mm guns that negated every tactical advantage they possessed. Weber returned to his damaged Panther. The maintenance crew had worked miracles. The transmission was patched functional, if not fully operational. The penetration hole in the glacis had been welded with a steel plate, not proper repair, but adequate for continued service. His crew had changed. Hans was gone evacuated. A replacement driver had been assigned. Wilhelm Berg, 27 years old, former mechanic, transferred from a Panzer IV unit. Competent, but unknown. Joseph Stein, the new radio operator, was 23, veteran of the Italian campaign. Quiet professional, carried a rosary he fingered during quiet moments. Heinrich Müller remained as loader. Still 19, still nervous. But he had survived 2 days of combat, and that counted for something. Otto Fischer remained as gunner, reliable, precise, the emotional anchor of the crew. Weber gathered them in the turret, spoke quietly in the darkness lit only by a shielded lamp. We have lost friends. We will lose more. The Americans have weapons that can kill us at any range. This is the reality we face. But we are still alive. We are still soldiers. We still have a duty. He paused, chose his next words carefully. I will not lie to you as others have lied. Our armor is not invulnerable. The Panther is an excellent tank, but it can be destroyed. Your survival depends on skill and luck and staying alert. Trust your training. Trust each other. Trust me to make decisions that give us the best chance. Heinrich spoke hesitantly. Herr Oberfeldwebel, do you think we can win the war, I mean? Weber looked at the young man. 19 years old, same age as the loader who had burned alive in Werner Brandt's tank, same age as thousands of German boys being fed into a war machine that was running out of fuel and ammunition and time. I think we can survive, Weber said carefully. And survival is its own kind of victory. It was the most honest answer he could give. Outside, the sound of engines starting, orders being relayed, a battalion preparing to attack again at dawn, the rumble of artillery in the distance, the cold wind carrying the smell of smoke and winter. Weber climbed into his commander's position, settled the headphones over his ears, checked the radio frequencies, prepared for another day of combat against an enemy who had closed the technological gap and possessed overwhelming industrial superiority. The letter to his son remained in his breast pocket, unfinished, unsent. Tomorrow, December 23rd, Franz Weber's Panther would take a 90mm round through the turret side. He would save his gunner, Otto Fischer's life by dragging him from the burning tank. Would lose his loader, Heinrich Müller, who died in the penetration, would be wounded himself, fragments in the shoulder concussion from the blast. But tonight he did not know any of this. Tonight there was only the cold metal of his tank, the quiet breathing of his crew, and the knowledge that morning would bring more death delivered by American guns that had changed the mathematics of armored warfare forever. The field hospital smelled of carbolic acid and gangrene and the particular sweetness of morphine administered to men who would not survive their wounds. Franz Weber woke to white ceiling canvas and the distant sound of artillery. His head felt like it had been split with an axe. His right shoulder burned with a pain that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. When he tried to sit up, nausea rolled through him and he fell back against the cot. A medical officer appeared, 40 years old, with the tired eyes of a man who had seen too much suffering. Oberfeldwebel Weber, you are awake. Good. You have a concussion and shrapnel wounds to the shoulder. The fragments have been removed. You will recover. Weber's voice came out as a croak. My crew. The doctor consulted a clipboard. Your gunner Fischer survived, severe trauma to the left arm. He will likely lose the arm, but he will live. Your loader Muller was killed in the initial penetration. Your driver and radio operator were wounded, but survived. They have been evacuated to Germany. Heinrich Müller, 19 years old, in combat for 6 days, dead. Weber closed his eyes, saw again the moment of penetration, the 90mm round punching through the turret side at 0847 hours on December 23rd. The flash of white light as the penetrator breached armor, the sound of metal tearing, Heinrich's body slumping against the ammunition rack, the massive trauma to his chest and neck, leaving no possibility of survival. Hell, how long have I been here? 3 days. It is now December 26th. The offensive has stalled. American counterattacks have begun. We are withdrawing to defensive positions. 3 days. Weber had lost 3 days to unconsciousness and morphine dreams, 3 days during which the Ardennes offensive had transformed from Germany's last great gamble into another costly failure. I need to return to my unit. The doctor shook his head. You are being reassigned. Training command in Bavaria, you leave tomorrow. I can still fight. Your battalion no longer exists as an effective combat unit. 14 Panthers operational on December 22nd, 4 operational today. Most of your comrades are dead or captured. You are being sent to train replacements because experienced commanders are more valuable as instructors than as casualties. The doctor's voice softened slightly. Oberfeldwebel, the war is not going well. We need men who can teach the next generation how to survive. You have that knowledge. Use it. Weber wanted to argue, wanted to insist he could still serve at the front, but the words died in his throat because the doctor was right. His battalion was destroyed, Ernst Hoffmann dead, Werner Brandt dead, Heinrich Müller dead, Hans Keller crippled, dozens of others gone in less than 2 weeks of combat. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. Germany was bleeding to death one tank crew at a time, and American 90mm guns were opening the veins. On December 28th, Weber boarded a train heading east into Germany. The journey took 2 days through a landscape of ruins. Allied bombers had turned German cities into wastelands of rubble and twisted steel. Refugees crowded the platforms at every stop, hollow-eyed and desperate, fleeing the Soviet advance from the east. The train passed through Stuttgart, where Weber had to change platforms. American prisoners of war were being marched through the station under guard. Young men, most looking barely 20, wearing winter uniforms that seemed absurdly clean compared to the filth-encrusted German soldiers surrounding them. One American wore a tank destroyer unit patch. Weber recognized the unit number from intelligence briefings, 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion, the same battalion that had destroyed his Panther near Manhay. The American was perhaps 20 years old, thin face, scared eyes moving with the careful steps of someone expecting violence at any moment. He looked utterly ordinary, not superhuman, not a representative of industrial might, just a frightened boy far from home. Weber realized something in that moment. The enemy was not giants. They were not superior soldiers. They were just young men like Heinrich Müller and Klaus Richter and all the others. The difference was not in the men, it was in what their nations could provide them. The Americans had better logistics, more weapons, unlimited ammunition, and increasingly technology that matched or exceeded German equipment. The realization settled into Weber's chest like a stone. Germany was not losing because German soldiers were inferior. Germany was losing because German factories could not match American production. Courage could not overcome that disparity. Skill could not compensate for it. Belief in racial superiority meant nothing when the enemy could field 5 tanks for every one Germany produced. The train continued east. Weber slept fitfully, dreaming of burning Panthers and the deep boom of 90-millimeter guns. Grafenwohr training facility sprawled across Bavarian countryside that looked almost peaceful under January snow. 6 worn Panthers for training their armor, scarred by years of use, their engines requiring constant maintenance to remain functional. Weber's assignment was clear: chief instructor for Panther tactics, 8-week abbreviated course for replacement crews. Young men, mostly between 17 and 22, pulled from anti-aircraft batteries and infantry units and given minimal training before being sent to tanks they barely understood. His first class assembled on January 8, 1945. 24 students who would form 6 crews. They stood in ranks in the motor pool, breath steaming in the cold air, trying to look like soldiers. Weber walked the line examining them, saw fear poorly hidden behind rigid military bearing, saw youth that would be devoured by combat within weeks of deployment, saw his son, Karl, in every face. He stopped in front of the formation, spoke without preamble. I am Oberfeldwebel Franz Weber. I have commanded tanks since 1941. I have fought on the Eastern Front in Normandy and in the Ardennes. I will teach you how to survive. A young man in the front rank, perhaps 18, raised his hand tentatively. Weber nodded permission. Herr Oberfeldwebel, is it true the Panther's armor can withstand any Allied gun? Weber had been expecting this question. The official training curriculum taught exactly that lie. He had a choice: follow the curriculum and send these boys to their deaths believing propaganda, or tell them the truth and possibly face court-martial for defeatism. He chose truth. No, that is not true. Stand up straight. What is your name? The boy stiffened. Klaus Bauer, Herr Oberfeldwebel. Klaus, the official training manual will tell you the Panther's glasses plate is invulnerable to frontal attack at combat ranges. I am telling you that is a lie. The Americans have a 90-millimeter gun that will go through your frontal armor at 800 meters, possibly farther. Do you understand? Shock rippled through the formation. These boys had been fed propaganda since childhood, had been told German weapons were superior, that German soldiers were invincible, that final victory was inevitable despite temporary setbacks. Weber had just destroyed that comfortable fiction. Herr Oberfeldwebel, another student ventured, if our armor cannot protect us, how do we fight? You fight smarter, you use terrain, you engage from positions that favor you, you identify threats before exposing yourself, you understand that your armor buys you seconds, not safety, and you use those seconds to shoot first or take cover. He paused. Let them process this. The rest of you listen carefully. Forget what the propaganda films showed you. Forget what the recruitment posters promised. I will teach you what actually works in combat. Some of you will die anyway. War kills soldiers regardless of training. But those who survive will do so because they understood reality instead of believing comfortable lies. The training facility commander, a Hauptmann named Reinhardt, called Weber to his office that evening. Reinhardt was 50 years old, had lost his left leg at Stalingrad, served now in administrative roles that kept him from the fighting he could no longer participate in. Oberfeldwebel Weber, I have received complaints about your instruction methodology. Weber stood at attention. Sir, I am teaching these boys how to survive. You are teaching defeatism. The official curriculum emphasizes our tanks' superiority over Allied equipment. You are directly contradicting approved doctrine. The approved doctrine is from 1943, Herr Hauptmann. This is 1945. The Americans have 90-millimeter guns now. The situation has changed. Reinhardt studied Weber for a long moment, then sighed and gestured to a chair. Sit down, Weber. That is not a request. Weber sat. Reinhardt poured 2 glasses of schnapps, handed one to Weber. My son is in a Panther battalion, 18th Panzer Division, facing the Soviets near Kustrin. He is 20 years old. His last letter told me his training emphasized the Panther's invulnerability to enemy fire. He drank. I know that is a lie. I know Soviet guns can penetrate Panthers. I know my son is probably already dead, and I simply have not received the telegram yet. The Hauptmann's voice became very quiet. So I will tell you what I am officially telling you. You will teach the approved curriculum. You will not deviate from doctrine. You will not spread defeatist sentiment. He paused, met Weber's eyes. Unofficially, I am telling you to teach these boys whatever will keep them alive. If that means contradicting the propaganda, do it quietly. If that means teaching them to retreat instead of dying, gloriously teach them that, because I do not want more mothers and fathers receiving telegrams about sons who died believing lies. Weber understood. Ja, Herr Hauptmann. Dismissed. And Weber, thank you. The training continued through January and into February. Weber taught his students the tactics he had learned through 3 years of combat and paid for with the blood of friends. How to identify M36 tank destroyers by their lower silhouette compared to Sherman's. How to recognize the deeper sound of 90mm guns, how to use terrain to minimize exposure, how to withdraw under fire without panicking, how to distinguish between orders that should be followed and orders that would result in pointless death. He showed them calculations proving that the Panther's armor, while excellent, was not invulnerable, demonstrated penetration mechanics using captured American ammunition, explained that sloped armor worked by deflection and deflection failed when the projectile carried sufficient kinetic energy to simply punch through regardless of angle. Most importantly, he taught them that survival was not cowardice. Dead tank crews, he told them repeatedly, do not help Germany. Living tank crews who fight tomorrow do. Your duty is not to die gloriously. Your duty is to fight intelligently and survive when possible. Klaus Bauer, the young man who had asked the first question, approached Weber after a training session in mid-February. Herr Oberfeldwebel, my brother died in a Panther in Normandy. His commander told my parents he died heroically charging American positions. I think he died because he believed the propaganda about our armor. Weber nodded slowly. Probably. I am sorry. Do not apologize, Herr Oberfeldwebel. You are teaching me not to make his mistake. That matters more than anything. Where are you being assigned after graduation? Eastern Front, 2nd Panzer Division. Weber's chest tightened. The Eastern Front was a meat grinder. Soviet IS-2 heavy tanks mounted 122mm guns that could penetrate Panther armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. The Soviets had numerical superiority even more overwhelming than the Americans, and they took fewer prisoners. Then listen very carefully. The Soviets have IS-2 heavy tanks. Their gun is even more dangerous than the American 90mm. Do not engage them frontally. Do not assume your armor will protect you. Flank them if possible. Call for 88mm anti-tank guns if available. Withdraw if neither option exists. Do you understand? Ja, Herr Oberfeldwebel. Good. Remember that. Your mother has already lost one son. Do not make her lose two. Klaus Bauer was killed in action on April 3, 1945, near Kustrin. His Panther was destroyed by a Soviet IS-2 at a range of 900 meters. The 122mm armor-piercing round penetrated the glacis plate and detonated the ammunition storage. Entire crew killed instantly. Klaus was 18 years and 4 months old. Weber learned of his death in late April from a letter sent by another instructor whose student had served in the same unit. The news arrived the same day. American forces overran the training facility and accepted the surrender of everyone present. On February 26th, news reached the training facility of an engagement at Elsdorf. An M26 Pershing from the American 2nd Armored Division had encountered German armor. The after-action report was brief, but devastating. 1 Pershing versus 2 Panthers and 1 Panzer IV, range between 800 and 1,200 meters. The Pershing spotted German tanks first using its superior optics. Engaged the 1st Panther at 1,000 meters, penetrated glacis armor, catastrophic kill. 2nd Panther attempted to engage, fired 75mm round at the Pershing. The round struck the Pershing's frontal armor and bounced off, failed to penetrate. The Pershing returned fire. 2nd Panther destroyed. The Panzer IV attempted to retreat, engaged at 800 meters, destroyed. Total engagement time, 8 minutes. American casualties, 0. The Pershing took 3 hits from German guns. None penetrated. Weber read the report 3 times. Each reading made the implications clearer and more terrible. The Americans had built a tank that could defeat Panthers frontally and could withstand Panther guns. The technological advantage Germany had relied upon was gone, completely eliminated, and the Americans could produce these tanks in quantities Germany could not match. He obtained interrogation transcripts from captured American tank crews through unofficial channels. One interview stood out. The interrogator asked a Pershing gunner how he assessed German tanks. The American's response was casual, almost dismissive. We're better. The 90mm will punch through anything they have, and our armor stops their 75mm. We're not scared of Panthers anymore. Before the Pershing, the American admitted they had feared German tanks. Superior guns, superior armor. Americans had to swarm. German tanks lose 3 to kill 1. But now, even fight. Maybe we've got the edge. Your technical advantage is gone, buddy. This is an industrial war now, and we've got more factories. Weber read those words again. Your technical advantage is gone. This is an industrial war now, and we've got more factories. That was the truth stripped of propaganda and national pride, the simple, brutal mathematics of production capacity. Germany could not build tanks faster than America destroyed them, could not train crews faster than combat consumed them, could not sustain a war of attrition against an enemy with limitless resources. The war was lost, had probably been lost since 1943. Everything since then was just determining how many more men would die before the inevitable conclusion. March 1945 brought warmer weather and the final collapse of German defenses in the West. American and British forces crossed the Rhine. Soviet armies drove deeper into eastern Germany. The training facility received orders to prepare for evacuation or possible defense against American advance. Weber's final class graduated on March 15th, 22 students. 2 had washed out, unable to master the mechanical and tactical requirements. The survivors stood in formation, newly qualified as Panther crew members, waiting for deployment orders that would send them to fronts where their new skills would be tested immediately. Weber gave them his final instruction. Gentlemen, you are now qualified Panther commanders, gunners, drivers, loaders, and radio operators. The Army will send you to the front. Some of you will fight the Soviets in the east. Some will face the Americans and British in the west. He paused, looked at each young face, saw his son Karl, saw Heinrich Müller, saw Klaus Bauer and all the others. I cannot promise you will survive. The odds are against you. Germany is losing this war. That is not defeatism. That is mathematics. We are outnumbered, outproduced, and increasingly outgunned. Several students shifted uncomfortably. This was dangerous talk. Admitting defeat could result in execution for undermining military morale. Weber continued anyway. But I can promise you this. If you remember what I taught you, you will live longer than if you believe the propaganda. Your armor is not invulnerable. Your courage cannot stop a shell. Your duty is to fight intelligently, not die gloriously. He let that settle. If you survive this war, you will have families. You will have children. Those children will ask what you did in the war. You can tell them I fought, I did my duty, and I survived to come home. His voice became quieter, more intense. That is more important than any medal or commendation. Survival is victory when your nation is losing. Do you understand? Ragged chorus of affirmatives. Good. Then good luck. I hope to see all of you after the war ends. He knew he would not. Most would be dead within weeks, some in their first engagement, others after days or weeks of combat. A few might survive to see the war's end in May, but most would die in burning tanks, killed by American 90mm guns or Soviet 122mm guns, or simply by the overwhelming numerical superiority of enemies who could afford to lose 10 tanks for every German one destroyed. Klaus Richter approached after dismissal. Herr Oberfeldwebel, thank you. My brother would still be alive if someone had taught him what you taught us. Weber had no response to that, just nodded and watched the young man walk away to whatever fate waited for him. On April 28th, American forces were 15 kilometers from the training facility. German command ordered evacuation and disbandment, every man for himself. Try to reach American lines before the Soviets arrived from the east. Weber assembled the remaining students. 16 were still present. Others had already fled. Gentlemen, the war is over, not officially, but in reality. Go home, destroy your uniforms, tell the Americans you were conscripted, which is true. Survive. That is your final mission. He destroyed the training records, burned the files that would identify these boys as SS-trained tank crews, protecting them from potential Soviet retribution for perceived war crimes. The students dispersed. Some heading west to surrender to Americans, others trying to reach homes in what would become the Soviet occupation zone. Weber never learned how many survived. On May 2nd, Weber surrendered to an American infantry patrol from the 3rd Infantry Division. He approached with hands raised, helmet removed, making himself obviously non-threatening. The American sergeant was perhaps 25 years old. From Texas, based on his accent. He looked tired, but not cruel. I am Oberfeldwebel Franz Weber, German Army. I surrender. The sergeant searched him professionally, found the letter to Karl in his breast pocket, started to read it, then handed it back. Tank commander. Ja, Panther tanks. Where's your tank? Destroyed December 23rd, near Manhay. The sergeant nodded slowly. 90mm gun. Yeah. Thought so. We killed a lot of Panthers in the Bulge. Not boastful, just factual. Weber was processed as a prisoner of war, searched thoroughly, photographed, fingerprinted, assigned to a camp near Augsburg where thousands of German soldiers waited for denazification screening and eventual release. The camp was crowded but relatively well run. Americans provided adequate food, medical care, and shelter. Better treatment than Weber had expected based on propaganda warnings about Allied brutality. In August, Weber was selected for detailed interrogation by American military historians documenting the Ardennes campaign. They wanted German perspectives on American armored capabilities. The interviewer was a captain, perhaps 30 years old, wearing historian's insignia. He spoke excellent German and took extensive notes. Oberfeldwebel Weber, when did you first encounter the American 90mm gun? Weber told him everything. The morning of December 17th, Ernst Hoffmann's death. The penetration that should not have been possible. The psychological impact of facing a weapon that negated fundamental tactical assumptions. Was the 90mm gun more dangerous than the British 17-pounder? Weber considered carefully. Technically, the 17-pounder had slightly better penetration with specialized ammunition, but the British rationed that ammunition. The Americans did not ration their 90mm rounds. They fired as many as needed. He paused. More importantly, the M36 tank destroyers were employed differently. British Fireflies advanced with tank formations. We could anticipate them. M36s ambushed from prepared positions. We never knew where they were. That uncertainty was worse than the gun itself. The historian wrote rapidly. In your professional opinion, why did Germany lose the armored war? Weber thought about Ernst and Werner and Heinrich and Klaus and all the others. Thought about American factories producing 20 tanks for every one Germany built. Thought about the mathematics of industrial warfare. Industrial capacity, your country could produce 20 tanks for every one we built. And by late 1944, your tanks were good enough to fight ours on equal terms. Quality cannot defeat quantity when the quality gap disappears. He met the historian's eyes. The 90-millimeter gun didn't just defeat our armor, it defeated our belief. For 3 years, German tank crews maintained morale despite impossible odds because we believed our individual technical superiority compensated for numerical inferiority. The 90-millimeter gun destroyed that mathematics. When your tank destroyers could kill Panthers frontally, we had no remaining advantage. Just courage and courage and skill cannot overcome industrial disparity. The historian nodded slowly. That is very honest. What purpose would dishonesty serve? The war is over. Truth costs nothing now. Weber was released from the POW camp in October 1945. Denazification cleared him of war crimes. He was assigned work as a translator for American occupation authorities in Munich. Small apartment, steady pay, survival in a devastated nation. In November, his son Carl found him. Carl was 17 now, taller than Weber remembered, thin from inadequate food, but alive. He had survived the war's end, had been in training. When his facility was overrun by American forces, had surrendered without fighting. They embraced in the doorway of Weber's apartment, father and son, both survivors, both marked by war in ways that would never fully heal. Father, I received your letter, the one you sent from the Ardennes. It arrived in March. I kept it. Weber had forgotten the letter. What did it say? Carl pulled it from his jacket. Read aloud. Courage cannot defeat physics. Your bravery will not stop a shell traveling 800 meters per second. Do not believe the instructors who tell you the Panther makes you invincible. It does not. That his voice became thick with emotion. You saved my life. I believed the instructors until I read that. Then I understood. When the Americans came, I surrendered immediately. Others tried to fight. They died. Weber pulled his son close. I am glad you survived. That is all that matters. They stood together in silence. Outside, the sounds of Munich rebuilding, the clatter of rubble being cleared, the grind of construction equipment, the slow, painful process of a nation trying to heal from self-inflicted wounds. Franz Weber lived another 28 years, worked as a technical translator for German automotive companies, watched his son graduate university, marry, have children, built a quiet life in the ruins of the world he had fought for. But the war never truly left him. Nightmares came regularly. Ernst's Panther exploding, Heinrich dying in the turret, the deep boom of 90-millimeter guns, the sound that meant death was incoming and armor would not save you. In April 1973, Weber collapsed from a massive heart attack, rushed to Munich University Hospital. Initial treatment seemed successful, but the damage was extensive. On April 20th, his son visited. Father, the doctors say, you are improving. Weber managed a weak smile. The doctors are kind to lie. I am dying, Carl. It is acceptable. I am 55. I lived longer than Ernst, longer than Werner, longer than Heinrich, longer than most of my crews. Do not talk like that. I need to tell you something. About December 17th, 1944. Carl leaned close. Weber's voice was fading, but the words came clearly. When Ernst's tank was hit, I watched the turret blow off. In that moment I knew, not just that he was dead, I knew Germany was lost. Everything we had fought for, everything we believed about our equipment superiority, it was all lies. He paused, breathing labored, and I felt relief that the end was visible. That maybe you would survive because the war would end before you had to fight. Terrible is it not? My best friend died, and I felt relief. No, father, that is not terrible. That is human. Weber began crying. First time Carl had ever seen his father cry. I survived so many of them. Ernst, Werner, Heinrich, Hans, they all died or were maimed, and I lived. Why? You did your duty. You brought men home when you could. You taught students to survive. You told me the truth so I would not die believing lies. That is why. Weber died 2 days later, April 22nd, 1973, 28 years, 4 months and 5 days after watching Panzer 231 destroyed by an American 90-millimeter gun. His last words, witnessed by Carl, were fragments. Panzer 231, Ernst, I could not. The sound, that boom, tell them the armor was not. Then silence. The funeral was small. Family, a few former students who survived, and one surprise attendee. An American veteran who had traveled from Texas, James Henderson, former M36 gunner with the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Henderson spoke briefly. I never met Oberfeldwebel Weber during the war. I was shooting at men like him. Maybe I shot at him specifically. I do not know, but I have read his interviews, his analysis. He understood something important. We were not better soldiers. We had better logistics, more weapons, and eventually our weapons were good enough to match yours. He paused. Weber was honest about that. He did not make excuses. He said you had more factories and your weapons closed the gap. That is truth. It took courage to say it when German pride wanted to blame anything else. I am honored to be here. He was a worthy opponent. I am glad we are not enemies anymore. Carl gave the final eulogy. My father once told me the armor was not invulnerable. I survived by understanding that truth. Others died believing the lie. That was his gift to me. The truth. Even when truth was harder than lies, he looked at the assembled mourners. The American 90mm gun killed many German soldiers, but it taught my father a lesson that saved my life. Technology is not magic. Armor is not invincible. Survival requires understanding reality, not believing propaganda. His voice strengthened. He was a good soldier, a better teacher, and the best father a son could have. Rest in peace, father. The war is over. The guns are silent. You can rest now. Franz Weber was buried in Munich Forest Cemetery. Small headstone, simple inscription, soldier, father, teacher. The sound of the 90mm gun, that deep boom that had haunted him for 28 years, was finally silent. But his legacy remained in the son who survived because his father told him truth instead of propaganda, in the students who lived because they learned reality instead of comfortable lies, in the honest testimony he gave to historians so future generations might understand not just what happened, but why. The American 90mm gun had destroyed more than German tanks. It destroyed belief in technological superiority, destroyed the illusion that quality could overcome quantity in industrial warfare, destroyed the comfortable fiction that courage and skill alone determined victory. For Franz Weber and the men who fought beside him, the 90mm gun represented the moment when mathematics became undeniable and hope became unsustainable, not because the gun was technically superior to all others, but because it was good enough in sufficient numbers wielded by an enemy with unlimited industrial capacity. That was the lesson Weber carried from December 1944 to April 1973, a lesson purchased with the lives of friends, paid for in burning tanks and shattered armor and young men who died believing lies their nation told them. The truth Weber understood too late to save most of them was simple and brutal. In modern industrial warfare, adequate technology combined with overwhelming production capacity defeats superior technology with limited production. The American 90mm gun was not the best anti-tank weapon of World War II, but it was good enough, and America had enough of them. That was enough to change everything.